John McMullen's a wordsmith. We'll bring him into the conversation, talk a little NFL, a little Birds, a little Eagles, OTAs. Doug Peterson will speak on Monday. We'll have the latest for you here on the Sports Bash. Football at 4, John McMullen. What's going on, Johnny Mac? How are you, pal?
Doing well. How are you, Mike?
All is well. Were you one of the people that tuned into the NBA Finals last night, or were you part of the Toronto market that didn't get registered?
No, I watched. I always watch the NBA Finals. It's a little difficult these days. You wish they'd start the games earlier, but as I always say, TV rules all, and they want the games in prime time.
Well, they are in a tough spot. You know, I read this thing before that Adam Silver said that they might think about starting West Coast games earlier, but I'm like, I get the fact that we over here have 50% of the television population, but if you're starting a basketball game at 6 o'clock, for the people who are going to the game, that stinks.
Yeah, it does. And it also hurts your impact in the West Coast because it's not prime time. So it is a difficult balancing act, and East Coast is going to have to deal with it. I don't think it's changing.
Well, I'll tell you,
soon.
I don't know about you. I felt that LeBron this year, I felt like this, because they're talking about LeBron not being in the finals and this and that. I said, this whole season has felt LeBron-less. Him going to the Lakers, I thought hurt the NBA because you already had your best team, the Warriors, playing at 10:30 at night a lot. And now your best player is now competing for playing time on television against your best team, where before you had your best player in the East and your best team in the West. I thought LeBron going to the Lakers actually backfired on him.
Yeah, that's it. Well, that's interesting because you have such a marquee franchise, and you would think it's a perfect fit having LeBron James on the Lakers. And I think that would be the hope, and that would ultimately be the hope, but they weren't that good. So that plays into it. I don't care who you are. Generally, when you have a player of that stature, you're not going to be that bad. You're not going to miss the playoffs. And that's what happened. So I think that's the bigger issue than anything else. They just weren't successful. I think LeBron James on a successful Lakers team, because of the marquee nature of that franchise and what it's meant to that league, I think it would be huge. Team just wasn't any good.
But even if they were good, they're competing.
As a whole, Mike.
Even if they were good, John, they would be competing for television time with Golden State. You can only put one team on at 10:30.
Well, yeah, but I don't think that's an issue in the fact that there's no shortage of marquee teams if you can make them into marquee teams. And the Lakers are always going to be the Lakers. The Warriors can make another finals next year and make it 7 in a row the year after and be one of the great dynasties of all time. They're still not going to be the Los Angeles Lakers. That's what I mean. It's the Celtics and Lakers, 1-2, or vice versa in that league's history. It's always going to be that way, sort of like the Dallas Cowboys. There's always – sports are cyclical. It's going to be up and down. You're going to have successful years, down years. But there are certain franchises, New York Yankees in baseball, Lakers are that type of franchise. So I don't think that has much to do with it. As far as the ratings – look, we talk about this all the time. Ratings are going down all over the place. It's got nothing to do with the Raptors. It's got to do with television, the industry as a whole. Occasionally you have an anomaly, and people say, well, look, this isn't going down. But that's rare. Everything everywhere is going down. That's just what it is.
Yeah. John, let me ask you this then. Do you think the NFL would ever consider putting a team in Toronto?
Yeah, I think the NFL is bullish on international markets. Obviously, London is – people have talked about, can you put a team there? I think the logistics are too difficult traveling. Some people have talked about playing an entire season there, but different teams, so one game a week. China is a huge market for the NFL. China is a huge market for everybody. Everybody's desperately trying to break into that market because of the burgeoning economy there. And the NFL is popular. People have to understand, as popular as it is in America, doesn't translate well. So they've been trying for years to develop the sport outside the borders, and it's difficult. So if they could get an international team, whether it's Toronto, whether it's London, I think someday. I think it's coming at some point. I don't think it's coming in the near future, but I think it'll ultimately happen.
Yeah, why do you think that is? That it's funny because we had one of the blackjack players in here, Antron Dillon, on Wednesday's show, and I asked him if the Arena League was before the NFL, like that was the only football we knew, would the Arena League be as popular as the NFL is now? Because what you just said is right. Football, as we know it, is not nearly as popular anywhere else it travels.
No, and I talked about that before in the over legislation of the game. It's impossible to teach to somebody who's not indoctrinated to it as a youth. It's such a complicated game. It's ridiculous. It really is. If you think about the simplicity of soccer, which is the world's most popular sport and would be called football outside this country, or basketball, which would be the second most worldwide, or even something like hockey, which is huge in Europe, in Eastern Europe at least. The games are simple. They're simple. They're simple to understand. The NFL, think about the rules of that league, Mike. It's absurd, and they don't understand it. And it's one of those things I always shake my head at, that so many smart people can't wrap their minds around such a simple solution. You got to make the game simpler so people outside this country who haven't grown up with it can understand it. Nobody understands it.
I don't know that the people who play it understand it anymore. They've tinkered it so much, right?
Well, exactly. We talk about the rules, and let's be honest. If you take the average fan and who doesn't study this stuff and just shows up on Sunday and watches the game, you could throw 10 rules at them that they don't know easily, that they don't understand, that they weren't aware of until it actually happened. And the league, as I said, they just do not understand that, and they don't think it's a problem. And I think it's a huge problem.
John McMullen with us here at JF McMullen. Every so often we hear the whispers of a 18-game schedule, and we're starting to hear about it again as a CBA is in the near future here. So, John McMullen, will the 18-game schedule gain more steam this time around, or is this just like, hey, we're just going to limp this out there and see what happens?
Well, I think it's always been a negotiating ploy of the owners, at least recently, where they throw out 18 games and then they scale back for something else, and sort of the bargaining back and forth. Ultimately, I think they'd like to get there. You have that safety issue, which is dogma for certain people, so it's difficult to get around. There's the simple solution of cutting the preseason to 2 games, that you're playing the same amount of games, but then you talk about the starters and their reps, they're not going to play in the preseason. So I do think ultimately it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen with this CBA. Ultimately, when it does happen, I think they're going to eliminate preseason games altogether. There's going to be none, and I think there should be none. And I think ultimately that'll be the end game, but I don't think it's going to happen in this CBA.
Yeah, I know that something that we just talked about it, the safety, the violence, and all that stuff. To even suggest throwing 18 games out there sounds preposterous, but could this potentially result in expansion of rosters and all that stuff to get more people paid?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it for the NFLPA, the more jobs. And if you think about the last CBA, the increase of practice squads, anytime there's more jobs, that's better for the union. And obviously more people are employed with very good jobs and very good salary. So that's always a check mark for them in their column. And these tends to be, and I call them ancillary issues, and they tend to generate a lot of hype, but at the end of the day, they're kind of meaningless, and that's things like personal conduct policy, things like marijuana testing. Those things go back and forth, but if the players get the revenue split they want, they'll agree to a lot of things. That's in every CBA and every professional sport. That's really what it comes down to. If you get the split you want, you'll let the owners have what they want.
We'll keep an eye on that because I think that one's always interesting because the game is a lot, quote-unquote, safer, right? I mean, so they might feel like, hey, we have made the game so much safer that playing 2 extra games would not be counterintuitive.
Well, I mean, there's such – the science of concussions, for instance, it remains in its infancy, and I don't think there's any legitimate studies that haven't been done long enough. I don't know if the game is safer dramatically in theory because you've taken out the hard hits and things of that nature. To be honest, and I've always said, I think it's more of a PR thing. I don't. The only way you can eliminate concussions and head injuries from football is to stop playing football. And do people want that? I don't know. Some people certainly do. But I don't know if you can make the game safe. It's a violent game.
Yeah, no doubt. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, Football at 4, John McMullen here. Let's look at some Eagle stuff here. Number one, the running back spot is something I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about today. The battle to watch there because I was thinking about this. You got Jordan Howard, a 2-time 1,000-yard rusher, and you got Miles Sanders, a second-round pick. Those 2 guys are going to make the team. After that, I think you got a very interesting – the rotation far from solidified here. You've got – Wendell Smallwood, Corey Clement, Josh Adams, Donnell Pumphrey, Boston Scott, all trying to win how many jobs here. And Sanders being out right now isn't helping, but he's not going to not make the team. But you can see a scenario where Smallwood, Clement, Adams, Pumphrey, Scott, that you can make an argument that any one of those guys cannot make the team.
Oh, yeah. And I would even throw, believe it or not, I would throw Corey in there. I think he is going to make the team, but if he has a really bad training camp or has some issues, even he could not make the team. I think every year we look at numbers and we say, well, how the heck is Wendell Smallwood going to stick around? And he always seems to stick around. Josh Adams is another guy. He's coming off shoulder surgery, so he's not able to do off-season work like he'd like to. And that's always an issue for younger players. So there's a guy who led your team in rushing, and he might not make a football team. You're right. There's only 2 constants, and they're Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders. And even Sanders, I think the best-case scenario is the Eagles want him to be involved and want him to be the complement to Jordan Howard when the regular season starts. But he's got to get healthy from the hamstring. He's got to prove he can do it. Now, he's not in danger, as you mentioned, of not being on the roster, but he is. It's not like they're just going to throw him out there. He's got some things to prove as well. The only constant is Jordan Howard.
Yeah, Jordan Howard is the guy who they made the trade for this offseason. You would think that he would be kind of the I don't want to say bell cow because this team won't have one, but the guy who ends up with the most carries on this team. But I saw the other day, I guess Adam Schefter said that Sproles has not made a decision, but the Eagles would be one of the teams, and then some of those other teams, the Saints and the Chargers. But I know that you have said, yeah, I think Sproles could come back, but any feeling watching these OTAs of whether or not they say, you know what, these guys aren't cutting it, we're going to call Sproles, or do they think that they have enough?
Well, no, I think they have enough. I think Miles Sanders was drafted to take that role and be that guy. So he would have to fall flat on his face in training camp or be injured or something of that nature before I think they might pick up the phone. I talk about it all the time. Doug Peterson loves Darren Sproles, trusts him. I think he'd love to have him around, but you got to be realistic. You got to look at his age. You got to look at his injury history. over the past 2 years, and that's one you should probably move on from. And it's a difficult league. You got to make difficult decisions, and I think that's one of them. And the Eagles have made it. I mean, right now they're moving on. If he doesn't sign elsewhere and he wants to play and something does happen, I think that's the first guy they'd call. But something would have to happen, and he'd have to want to play, and he'd have to have not signed elsewhere. So there's a lot of ifs there.
Real quick, too, we talked a lot about running back, but I want to move to left tackle and say, Peters, obviously, they drafted Dillard, Jordan Mailata, and Vaitai. Vaitai's apparently been moving all over the place, playing some guard. How is that backup or left tackle spot kind of shaping up? Is Mailata in the mix? Is it Dillard's spot there? Is Vaitai the guy? I think that's another interesting thing to kind of keep an eye on because, as we know with Jason Peters, that second guy gets a lot of burn.
Yeah, I mean, that's Andre Dillard. That's his job. That's what they drafted him for. He'll start out, as I said, he'll be the game day swing tackle behind Jason Peters and Lane Johnson. The Eagles are going to work him strictly at left tackle to start. As they do with a lot of young players, they don't want to put too much on their plate. But that's an enormous talent. That's a top 15 level talent. That's his job, and that's the reason Vaitai was moved inside, and he's playing right guard as Brandon Brooks continues to rehab. And Jordan Mailata has been moved to right tackle and has been getting first-team reps because Lane Johnson isn't at OTAs. So Mailata's coming along. I've told everybody on this show numerous times it was a 3-year project. Jordan Mailata is about 2020, not 2019. And the hope is next season, Jason Peters retires. He's not here. Andre Dillard's the left tackle. And the hope is Jordan Mailata at that point would be the swing tackle.
Interesting to keep an eye on that whole tackle situation because, as we mentioned, Peters. What about Brandon Brooks? I saw him sprinting the other day. So is there more feeling that he could be ready sooner than later?
No, I mean, his goal is week 1.
Right.
That injury happened very, very late. Obviously, in the playoff game against the Saints, it's a torn Achilles. That time frame is tight when you think about, especially a guy at his size and his frame, to come back that quickly from a torn Achilles. He has been rehabbing. Obviously, he's sprinting, as you mentioned. He's a big social media guy. He'll always post his workouts. He's doing very well, but yeah, he's still a long way off, and the goal for him has always been week 1.
A couple quick NFL notes. Gerald McCoy, he's been all over the place. Carolina, he's visited Cleveland, Baltimore, now Carolina. He's a big name that's still out there. I would imagine the Eagles don't have any interest there, but any feel about what McCoy might do? Because he's a pretty talented guy.
Yeah, he can still play, and he's more of a 3 technique. And I think, as you mentioned, anytime there's a big name, you get the questions. Can the Eagles get him? The Eagles are pretty well set inside. They're paying Malik Jackson a lot of money to be that complement to Fletcher Cox, who's probably the second best defensive tackle in football behind Aaron Donald. So Gerald McCoy's not going anywhere to be a backup. That's for sure. So, no, the Eagles are not in that mix. And you mentioned the 3 teams, Cleveland, Baltimore, Carolina. He's going through his visits, late sort of stage free agency, and that'd be a big get for any of those teams, especially Carolina, because they need, of those 3 teams, they need the most help on the defensive line.
All right, football at 4 every day at 4 o'clock right here on the Sports Bash. All guests appear via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. And Eagles OTAs back at it this week. They'll have speaking is Doug Peterson on Monday, so we'll have some more news from him. And I think there's also a media availability on Wednesday as well. So the Eagles back at it. And then after that, they got the mini camps, and then we go dark for a little while. But football at 4 will always remain here on the Sports Bash. Thank you, pal.
And real quick, before I go, Carson Wentz softball game, AO1 Foundation tonight.
Is that tonight?
Citizens Bank Park.
I
today.
saw that. And by the way, I know Rodney McLeod's got something coming up. We're going to be having Rodney on the show sometime next week. We'll have details on that.
And Roddy's another one of those rehabbing guys, and he's looking good. So, but his goal is later in the summer.
All right. We'll try to catch up with Roddy next week. And, of course, we'll catch up with John McMullen Monday, live from the Barefoot Beach Bar. We will be there. John, we will talk to you then.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, John McMullen, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Hotline, Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen.